Indian author Arundhati Roy recently wrote the following: historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and our dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with a little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. Yes, certainly this is a new world that we are experiencing right now. And the question for us as technologists, for those of us that are leading the charge into digital transformation is, are we going to walk through this with the same concepts and mindsets that we've had in the past? Or will we come through with just a little luggage, imagining a new and exciting world that we can all participate in? It is essential that we have new thinking. The world dynamic has changed beyond belief now. The need for regionalization rather than globalization, a new concept of Cold War in different ways, the inability for us to meet face to face and to contact each other. These things have driven a need for us to be able to participate in marketing, selling, and delivering financial services in a completely new and unique way. So what is that way? Well, the response has been digital transformation. Why? Digital transformation enables us to reach our client base without the need for physical contact, to allow them to be able to execute what they need to and to build trusted communications between us and them in an entirely digital way. As a result, there has been a tremendous acceleration for digital transformation over the pandemic period. A recent study that was carried out by Twilio has estimated that the acceleration of digital transformation from its existing course, but during COVID-19, has been the equivalent to bringing it forward by 5 years and 3 months. Wow. That basically means that those budgets over a 5-year period have now been crammed into a much shorter time frame. But is this just another crazy idea that everybody has? Is this another bubble or boom that we're going through? Or is this really a valuable and substantial change that drives economic value for us and proper and better services for our clients? Well, the answer, as with all these things, is the same. It depends on how you're approaching the problem. So in order to answer that, we need to ask ourselves the question, when we say digital transformation, what is that? Well, let's answer that question clearly. Digital transformation exists in 3 layers. And the top layer describes in 4 blocks the main elements that are needed in order to make up a truly digital strategy. Block number 1. This is moving our applications to the cloud. This is often the first point that people start their digital transformation journey. Why is it important? Well, in order for us to avoid having on-premises machines with all the commissioning and decommissioning, physical contact, the need to be able to buy more machines if we're expanding up due to higher volumes or volatility, but to be able to control costs. All of these are problems that exist when we have on-premises architectures. When we take these away and we put them into the cloud, but then we can have machines which are pre-commissioned for us. We don't need people to go into an office to be able to touch them. We don't have machine operations. And the most valuable element, but one that many organizations don't get right, is that in commissioning our machine through our software code, asking, for example, to initiate the application with 12 CPUs or GPUs, we are then able to monitor the performance of the system whilst it's in production. And as we begin to reach a capacity, we can, through our software, ask the architecture to increase itself by another 4 processors, or if we find that we have far too many, and that we're not using the capacity, then in order to constrain our cost, we can ask the software to reduce that architecture for us. This ability to expand up and contract down is an essential element in the new world in which we live. Why? Because I don't have a crystal ball and neither do you. We don't know whether the future is going to drive more volume, more volatility, or whether things are going to substantially drop off. In fact, we don't know whether there will be a 3-month period of growth followed by a 2-month period of stagnation, followed by a recession, followed by high growth. This prediction now of the future has become far more difficult for us in various markets, and not just equities. The bond markets, the foreign exchange markets have all suffered from a lack of being able to be previsible. And as a result, we don't know what level of capacity we require at any given time. So moving to the cloud enables us to do that. And it is the first step in a digital transformation strategy. The second element is the introduction of new techniques and methods in the delivery of both software and, through that software, the services to our end clients. What do we call that? Well, the modern methods that are being used are described as DevOps. We're going to talk about DevOps in a second because it is the second layer that exists within the digital transformation 3-layer model. But in summary, it requires a cultural change, a cultural mindset shift in the way in which organizations are delivering their technology to their clients and internally as well. But we'll come back to that in a second. What is the third element? The third element is the introduction of predictive technologies. So we've heard a lot about artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning. Organizations have been proud to spend small fortunes, if not in fact large fortunes, on creating artificial intelligence models and employing data scientists. And we have to ask ourselves, do these organizations clearly understand how their investment is going to produce more valuable economic value add? Well, many of those companies haven't considered that aspect. And they're not the only ones. There are many large organizations we think of as being successful that actually make no money. Uber is an example. They've never made a profit. Tesla, in reality, has never made a profit. And is it correct for us to think of investing in new technology in that way? Well, it's certainly not necessary. Why do we say that? Because when we consider what artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning really are, and break them down into their most simplest concept, we begin to understand that they are in fact no more than a prediction. A prediction is not an automation, and a prediction is not a decision. It's a prediction. So why does that make things simpler, given that automation is perhaps where we find our savings? Well, it makes it simpler because you do not have to re-engineer your entire business in order to include predictive technologies inside your digital transformation. You already have a business. That business already has a value. That's what your profit and loss describes. It is described by a series of processes, and those processes are broken out in little steps under your workflows. So how does AI fit into that? Well, if we were to take any given workflow and to look through it, we can identify where the predictions occur. Let's take a very simple example. Let's imagine that I wanted to lend you $1,000. What would be on my mind in lending that? Well, very simply, what's the probability you would pay it back? I would need to predict that. Interestingly, it's never 100%, even if you were the most honest person on the planet. Something could happen that prevents you from repaying. It's also never 0%. Don't imagine that even the worst people on the planet wouldn't pay you back, possibly. So it's somewhere in the middle. It's an opinion, a prediction, perhaps if we were to do it personally based on our own emotions. But a machine doesn't have emotions. Today, in many financial institutions, those predictions are based on spreadsheet models, perhaps using something like a Monte Carlo simulation or some other statistical method. If we look at our workflow, we can see the model for lending inside a bank. Fill in the form, have a look at the person, have a look at the predictions based on who they are and where they come from as to whether they will repay, make a decision, lend the money, look for the repayments to be made, and then go through the cycle again. If we were to take out that one simple step of the Excel spreadsheet, saying, what is the probability using this model of the opinion of a bank manager who's met with somebody as to the probability of someone paying, and to replace that with an artificial intelligence model that gives us a percentage prediction which is more accurate, without bias, without passion, without greed, and places it inside the workflow in exactly the same place as the previous prediction, then it can be used and we can carry on. So what about automation? How does that fit in with the digital transformation strategy? Well, one of the challenges with predictive technologies in the financial markets is the question of whether they are auditable or not. If you can't audit something, usually the regulatory authorities are uncomfortable about it being used. But let's take the example of a trader who comes in the morning and he makes a decision on buying, let's say, a particular equity. It is impossible for us to audit the mind and the heart of that trader as it was that morning. He may have had a bad day and decided he was going to sell. He may have just fallen in love and decided he was going to buy something. We cannot audit the mind and the heart of an individual. What can we audit? We can audit the decision they made and the result of those decisions. When we understand that predictive technologies in the financial markets are no more than a prediction, then we know that the responsibility of making a decision rests with the human. Humans might decide, going back to our example of lending money, that in every case where the machine is predicting that there is a 85% chance or more of someone repaying, that we will automatically go through the process of lending the money. That's fine. That's an automation built on top of a prediction. But it is still the humans who have made the decision that they will automate above a certain value. And that is auditable. And for that, the humans, not the machine, can be held accountable. Understanding these concepts and deploying them within our organizations as part of a digital transformation strategy enables us to do a number of things. Firstly, to employ valuable predictive technologies right now without the need for re-engineering our business. Second, to improve the accuracy of our predictions and therefore enhance our profits or reduce our losses with a minimum amount of fuss created. Thirdly, that we can automate based on those predictions, but with the human input of making a decision, what is the cutoff point for that? And lastly, where we could understand the economic value of our business before through its profit and loss, we can measure the enhanced economic value that occurs as a result of putting a prediction based on a machine inside the workflow at that point over time. So predictive technologies are important, both for customer facing, for decision making, and also for fraud and compliance purposes inside the financial markets. And they can be used today as part of your digital transformation strategy. In fact, using them in this way means that our data scientists are not looking for all our data so that that can tell us what to do, but rather we're telling the data what it is that we require from it, a key principle that's necessary in proper machine learning, that we know what it is we're looking for, and therefore we reduce the amount of data, the amount of cleanup, the amount of time, and certainly the amount of data scientists that are needed in order to deliver value for us. So we have the cloud, we have DevOps, we have predictive technologies, and lastly, within digital transformation, we have the channels. Channels give us an opportunity to do three things. Number one, it is a given. Everybody today must have a multi-set of channels that meet their customers' needs, where the customer is able to execute their transactions easily, quickly, and reliably, whether they do it through a television, through online, through a cell phone, through a telephone. That's just a given. So number one, a reliable transaction method. Number two actually is very important to us today, because there is so much fake news out there that even with major news channels, people do wonder whether they're getting the full story, whether they can believe it or understand it. But let me ask you a question. What if a major investment bank was telling you something? Would that be more reliable? Would you feel more confident that an organization of that stature, whose reputation isn't linked to the number of people who are going to read their article, that sort of organization might be able to provide you with a reliable channel for receiving information? Certainly, major corporate organizations, particularly in the financial sector, have such reputations in this sense that they can provide a reliable channel for news, for insight, and certainly for financial matters. That's why we trust them and give them our money in the first place. So, a channel for reliable information. But there is a very important third aspect. And the question is, how do we do this third one, which is perhaps the most valuable today? And it is this. Everybody is locked at home. We have lost our communities. In fact, we have several communities. You may have a community for your sports, a community for your religious beliefs or lack of them, a community for your financial matters, a community of family, a community of friends. We have a multitude of communities. One of the things that this pandemic sadly is going to drive is a shift in the economic models that exist. Some people are going to be poorer. I wish it wasn't that way, but sadly it is. Others will become richer as a result of this. The sum total of money in the world won't change, so distribution becomes an important aspect. But people are afraid, and they need to be able to feel part of a community that can support them with their financial decisions and financial matters. How do we use channel strategies to rebuild electronically the interactions that occur on a human basis that builds a community around someone? By doing that, we ensure their loyalty, we maximize the share of wallet, we increase the size of our customer base. Fine, all commercial outcomes. But you know what the most valuable thing is? We make humans feel safe. And that's what can be done with a proper channel strategy. In doing so, yes, you can enhance yourself commercially. Yes, you can build your brand off the back of that. That's important to ensure that we have healthy organizations. But most importantly, we can help. So at the top level, what do we have? The cloud, DevOps, we have predictive technologies, and finally, channel strategies. But we said there's a second layer here, DevOps. So what is that? Well, I like fours. So it also has four things. I wonder how many of these you know already. Number one, that we can describe our infrastructure inside our code. That is the reason why we have DevOps, which doesn't mean development people and operations people, as a bank would understand them, but it means technical development people and machine operations people. The people who would have been commissioning your hardware, putting on the operating systems and running the cables. These people now become part of a single team of developers and machine operators together, so that the machine people, the operators, can help the developers understand how to code their infrastructure inside their application. So infrastructure in the code. Second, the development of microservices. What's a microservice? Well, it's a fragment of code where the inputs into that code and the outputs are static. They are held, as, let's say, religiously. You know what that helps us to do? It means that we can change anything inside that code however we want without it affecting the rest of the system. Gone will be the days of us making a change and having to do a full impact analysis or to do a complete system test. Do you want to see this in action? Just go to google.com and you see the little picture sitting above the box. It's a microservice. How often does it change? But how often do you see Google take down the entire system so that they can test whether the image is going to work properly for everybody? Microservices may be small, but when they are properly constructed in their fragments, when they're interfaced correctly and they are built out, many microservices can make some of the most complex systems on the planet, from collateral management fully done on the web using microservices to trading systems for bonds and for equities. All of these things have already been constructed, and many, many more. Microservices reduces the amount of testing that has to be done substantially. And as you all know, testing is chewing up between 30 and 50% of your budget on any well-run project. What's the third element? Build to test. This is a different mindset. We used to write a spec, have a committee sit on it, sign it off, put it under change control, give it to the developers who would code it, and then from that coding, it then goes to the quality assurance testing team. Now, when we think of microservices or a collection of them in order to meet a customer need, then we can build to test. In fact, the description of what we're doing, and we'll come to that in a second, is more a description of the reality of what's going to happen than it is a script describing the business need. The code itself can be built inside a testing tool. The advantage, as we make changes that require an element of a system or an entire system to be tested, it can be done predominantly at the click of a button, making a radical change to the way in which testing models take place. And through this, by having infrastructure in the code, by building to test, and by developing in microservices, we achieve the fourth element known as CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment. That means that we can make changes into production on a regular basis without impacting the client base. In fact, whilst they're still using the system in production. So how do we actually code this? Well, this comes down to our third layer. And this is where the cultural mind shift occurs. And that's using agile methodologies. We're going to give this three parts. The first part is the way in which we do our business requirements. Now, we just spoke about the old traditional way. In fact, that way, the waterfall method, was designed for building battleships, where there can be no level of flexibility. Otherwise, a missile might accidentally get stuck inside the missile launching element and the whole ship would blow up. So how do we do it now? Well, instead of having highly qualified business analysts sitting down and consulting with users on how stuff is done, how much better would it be if a user could just tell this story? Perhaps they could say, I came in this morning and sat down at my desk and I put my finger on the little fingerprint reader and then my screen opened and it gave me a list of things that I have to do today. That's a user story. If you are a technical person here in this conference, can you imagine if you received that story, what you would be coding? I need a fingerprint, biometrics, and then it needs to automatically open up the application. And then on the right-hand side, they want to see a list of the actions that they require to take today. By building user stories which meet just the user's need, but many of them, a whole pipeline of them, we can describe complex systems in terms that any user can describe. These then go to squads of maybe 7 to 12 people. Those squads will receive a number of user stories. What is a squad? Well, it has defined roles. It's made up for a product owner and a scrum master or an agile coach and a number of technical and testing roles. And those squads, in order to be highly productive, they need to be cooperating fully throughout the day, which is interesting when we consider, for the Americas in particular, where I'm based, if you're going to offshore east to west, how can your squad be highly productive when there's a 10.5-hour time difference? If you were to offshore north to south, where that time difference is only an hour or two at the most, then we could see highly productive squads awake at the same time. So, yep, squads. And the last element, the squads will be given time boxes, typically 2 to 3 weeks. And they will sit down and do a sprint, it's called. They will do a sprint plan by looking at the number of user stories they have, the size of their squad, how many they can get done within 2 to 3 weeks, and they will plan perhaps the next 3 or 4 time boxes. As they go through the process of developing, testing, and putting into production, they may need to make adjustments in order to meet that 2 to 3 week period by bringing some forward if they're doing well, or pushing 1 or 2 back to the next sprint if they're not doing so well. But that method enables us to have defined deliverables which are easy to be changed. Why is that valuable? Well, let me ask you a question. How many of you here expect that your budget next year is going to be changed after 3 months, or 6 months, or 9 months? How many times has that happened to you in the past? By using these agile methods, the ability for you to chop and change means that you could better control your budgets in a very volatile world. And let's face it, the world has changed. Yes, the world is different. Digital transformation is a response to it. And digital transformation is those 3 layers, but driven by the top layer on the cloud with predictive technologies and channels and delivered using DevOps techniques. So what do you need to do? Well, I'm sure many of you are already well on your digital transformation journey. But if you're not, that's okay. The first thing to look at is your cloud strategy. To do an assessment of your current applications and see what can be moved on and what can't. What can be reconstructed, what needs to be componentized off of the cloud, but that can be accessed as if it were a very large microservice from the cloud. To make the decision and to stick with it that all new development must be cloud-based. And in that cloud base, to use those techniques we've spoken about. You also need to consider where predictive technologies can be added into your organization in a valuable way. And then to speak to your user base, your clients, not only the ones that you have today, but those that you love and want to come and join you in order to grow your business, and to ask them how they would like to interact with you, and to develop your channel strategy based exactly on that. Yes, the world has changed. The methods have changed. The delivery now is digital transformation. This is the future of financial markets in the new world. And we can tell you that organizations from north to south across the Americas, and particularly in Latin America, are driving the change in delivery of financial services using these techniques right now, and very, very hard. We agree entirely with Twilio that there is an advancement of at least 5 years as a result of this pandemic in the implementation of digital transformation. We wish you well, we thank you for your time, and we encourage you, apply digital techniques right now to future-proof your business.